And this is the work that I started doing 20 years ago with these fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates. When we talk about 60 grams an hour, or 80 grams an hour, or 100 grams an hour, it depends on the exercise intensities. And this is why it's important to be cautious about the nutritional recommendations. And this is why this feature can not only help athletes with their nutrition during, but it can also help nutritionists guiding their cyclists. More and more cyclists are working with nutritionists nowadays, right?
You're listening to Endurance Unlimited, a TrainingPeaks podcast for athletes and coaches, no matter what you're training for. Dial in those workouts with deep insights and cutting-edge science from the most prominent voices in the endurance and hybrid sports world. My guest today is Dr. Iñigo San-Millán, who is a world-renowned expert in exercise physiology and metabolic health. He is a coach with Team UAE, a world tour cycling team, and the current director of high performance at Team Athletic Club in the Spanish Premier League. He has carried out numerous studies, publications, and projects, including being the director at the University of Colorado Sports Medicine Center. In today's interview, we talk about how Iñigo worked to help develop the new Fueling Insights feature within TrainingPeaks that allows coaches and athletes to review and predict substrate utilization for cycling workouts. I hope today's discussion gives you more understanding how to leverage this powerful new tool. This is a special edition, special guest TrainingPeaks podcast here. So great to have an old friend of mine on. I think we've been buddies, went to school together 20 plus years ago. And so awesome to have you on board, Dr. Iñigo San-Millán.
Hello, Derek. How are you? Yeah, great to be back here. And yeah, after almost 30 years, we've been knowing each other and going through adventures and a lot of things going on since then.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I'm so psyched and such a privilege to have you on. It's your evening time, your time over in Spain, so about ready for your glass of wine, right?
Yeah, it's just about that. Yeah, just a very good beach day here today, and
nice,
probably.
Awesome. Well, it's, you can see my jersey behind me, Team UAE, signed by Tadej, who is a rider
Nice.
you worked with for several years. You still are employed by the team as a trainer. And tell us about the other aspect of your day-to-day job now, working in athletic club, soccer club?
Yeah, athletic club. Yeah. So I like in 2019 when I was asked to be the architect and put together a performance program for Team UAE. That's when I started, working with Tadej and other writers on the team, and I brought different methodologies, and we built up a pretty cool performance program. Our goal was it was like the 12th, 13th team in the world, something like that, and the goal in 3 years was to be a competitive team, one of the best in the world, and in 5 years was to be the best in the world and win the Tour de France. So we worked really hard, with the novel methodologies that we developed and we integrated, and it was I'm still attached to the team, but last year I started working with this professional soccer team here in the Basque Country that they offered me being the director of performance and supervising all the areas from medical services to physiology, psychology, biomechanics, physical therapy, etc. on the team. And it was a possibility to come back to the Basque Country. I had dual nationality from the U.S. and Spain, but it was a good break to come back here and take on this job. But that meant to me that I couldn't be traveling with the team so much. I was getting tired of traveling with, having a family and working at the university too. It was difficult to be traveling 80, 90 days a year with a cycling team. And I was trying to get something new and something like that was a break. It was different.
That's awesome. Always be learning. That's great. Getting a new experience. So we teamed up maybe about a year ago, started talking about developing a new feature within TrainingPeaks, which is now live. It's the first iteration, so look for more to come around it. But we call it Fueling Insights, and it really relates to substrate utilization. So what is substrate utilization, and why is this important for cyclists in particular? Because this feature really right now is isolated to bike workouts that have a power channel within it. So tell us why this feature is important, and how do you leverage it as a coach?
Yeah, so the ability of humans to exercise depends on the ability of converting chemical energy into mechanical energy, right? That chemical energy is about producing ATP, right? And the ATP comes from the burning or oxidation of fats and carbohydrates, mainly for energy purposes, right? So that is going to be converted into mechanical energy, which is what we call power output, right? So this fuel insights, it's trying to bridge that mechanical world or power world with the metabolic world. And this is an area where exercise physiology has been evolving in the last 20 years to more at a granular level of what happens at the cellular level and at the ATP synthesis and therefore at the substrate utilization. And that's the main thing that the Fuel Insights is trying to accomplish.
And so now when you work with your athletes, you are both trying to predict what they will burn and the fuel sources they will burn, but then you'll also look at what they actually burned. So how does this relate in terms of like advising the athlete and how to fuel for the workout or the race?
Yeah, so I started using this methodology about 20 years ago, substrate utilization, looking at fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates. And the main purpose for that back in the days was exactly that, to see how many grams per carbohydrates mainly an athlete had to was oxidizing, so they had to take. Also, trying to identify, that was also when I was already working with the different training zones, not just zone 2, the different training zones, try to put a metabolic tag to each training zone. And one of the metabolic tags that we could see very well is the FATMAX, right? So to try what's the intensity at the one you burn the most fat, right? So you can, whether for weight loss, because I was not just working with elite athletes, but also with clinical populations, you could identify the area where you can burn the most fat. Anyways, looking into this, what I saw is that cyclists and competitive athletes, they burn a lot more carbohydrates than what I expected. Something that I haven't seen in the literature, and people were not doing this methodology back in the days with competitive athletes. And then once I saw that they were burning so much carbohydrates at different exercise intensities, I took that to the next step, which was, okay, now we need to fuel these people correctly. The guidelines back then were 35 to 55 grams per hour of carbohydrates. Then with this methodology, I start to recommend 80 to 100 grams an hour. That's where my numbers were talking to me about the fuel needs. Obviously, back in the days, saying 100 grams an hour, it was crazy. I was crucified by most of the scientific community, nutritionists, because it was absolutely impossible to have 100 grams an hour. Quietly, I keep pushing it and even starting doing 125 grams per hour. And in fact, with Pogacar the first year as a pro, he was doing already 125 grams an hour. But the whole thing was that, to try to individualize fueling based on what you burned. And at the laboratory in Colorado, it was a normal thing that I had almost every day of the week, people coming to the laboratory, not just to get a metabolic testing, but one of the things they obtained was the fuel strategy for the race, whether it was like a marathon or a triathlon or a cycling race. You could tell, hey, if you went to a marathon at this pace, you're going to be oxidizing X amount of carbohydrates. You need to fuel with X amount of carbohydrates. The same thing for cyclists or triathletes. So I saw that it was very useful and it worked really well. And this is exactly what also we've been doing with Team UAE. We've been calculating grams per hour of oxidation based on different intensities, and we've been using different templates for different days. We know that some days are not going to be 125 grams of carbohydrate. They're going to be 80 or 90. But the same thing for training. It depends on the exercise intensities, and it's been working really well. So I think that a way to democratize this, right, through Fuel Insights with TrainingPeaks, I think it can be like a good step, into more individualized nutrition and fuel insight as it is. And of course, I want to make a point too that there's nothing like going to a well-established laboratory, right, and get everything just you, right?
Right.
Because we want to democratize this, and you cannot bring everybody to the laboratory. This is an algorithm based on all the research and all the data of many years of work.
Yeah, as you said, many years of work. So if we go back 8 years to 2017, you released a study with George Brooks, and the title of that study was Assessment of Metabolic Flexibility by Means of Measuring Blood, Lactate, Fat, and Carbohydrate Oxidation Responses to Exercise in Professional Endurance Athletes and Less Fit Individuals.
For sure.
So how does that study relate to the Fueling Insights that we just released?
Yeah, so one of the things is like we wanted to know, we want to explore mitochondrial function and a methodology to indirectly measure mitochondrial function by looking at blood lactate as well as fat oxidation. Both are substrates for mitochondria, and there are 4 great surrogates for mitochondrial function. And this is something that we could see very well in the 3 categories that we had. We had like Tour de France level cyclists. We had a group of moderately active individuals, 150 plus minutes a week. And then we had people with metabolic syndrome, clinical population, right? So with this methodology, we saw that there were significant differences in fuel utilization, both at carbohydrate oxidation rates as well as fat oxidation rates. So the elite athletes, they have a great mitochondrial function, and therefore they can oxidize, they can burn a lot more fat, right? They can also oxidize a lot of lactate for energy fuel purposes, and they can also, at lower intensities, because they are much more metabolically efficient, they don't need to burn as much carbohydrates, right? But at high intensities, very high intensities, when you deploy the turbo, they can oxidize a lot more carbohydrates. And this is in a way, and there are different ways to define this, metabolic flexibility, right? People who are metabolically inflexible, which are typical clinical populations with type 2 diabetic, metabolic syndrome, they have a mitochondrial decay or dysfunction, and they can't burn fat very efficiently. And because of that, they need to burn more carbohydrates, right? And this is what we see at low exercise intensities. They burn more carbohydrates, they burn less fat, but at high exercise intensities, they don't have the turbo either, that glycolytic power, and they burn a lot less carbohydrates.
Right. Okay, so then since 2017, you did hundreds of more tests within the lab across a wide array of athlete, non-athlete types, and you've collated all those, 300 some tests into your spreadsheet that you have effectively provided to us. So talk to us about that process and what actually did the test subjects do in the lab, and what data did you pull from them?
Yeah, so this is the work that I started doing 20 years ago with these fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates. And I was observing this every week, right, about the different exercise intensities, different levels of fitness. A different thing was a professional athlete versus a recreational athlete. And I was observing this. And so I think it got to a point to like, hey, I think I can gather information and put it out there. Because back in the days, and this is why like people were not talking about fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates, right? Even as I mentioned earlier, saying that athletes needed 100 grams per hour, it was a sin, right? So it's something that people were not talking about this, so I didn't want to do this much. I mean, just for the athletes coming to the lab, right? But in the last years, there are many laboratories around the world that are opening and measuring substrate utilization. People are talking more about grams per hour and fat oxidation and FATMAX. And I think, with all the data that I have, right, I can put together some and documented it, right? And I can really see and categorize from different levels. And that's what I showed to you guys, and it's the core, right, of the Fuel Insights.
And you see a lot of lab test results. I mean, people send you their lab tests probably weekly, asking for advice from you. Are all lab results equal? And if you suspect that some lab results are not accurate, what are you honing in on, and why may they not be as accurate as what your lab results are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I said, like a lot of people have been sending me, especially since this is becoming quite popular now, right? Fat and carbohydrate oxidation rates or substrate utilization, and sometimes just to review it, sometimes to hey, there's something wrong, doesn't make sense, right? And what do you think it could be the problem? Or sometimes they just, hey, what do you think about this? But the main thing that I see is that it's important to have a very good calibrated metabolic cart. This data is obtained from gas exchange, and that gas exchange is based on stoichiometric equations. That is the chemistry of carbohydrates and of the combustion of carbohydrates and fats, and looking at the oxygen needed and the CO2 produced, right? So for that, you need gas exchange and you need oxygen analyzer and CO2 analyzer, right? So on one hand, you have metabolic carts nowadays. They are or devices. They are quite rudimentary and they're being sold for $500 or $1,000 or $2,000. That they don't even have a CO2 sensor or analyzer. So if you don't have that, you're definitely not going to get this. It's not possible to get fat and carbohydrate rates, in my estimate, but who knows? On the other hand, you have units who have both that CO2 and oxygen, but it's not completely or perfectly well calibrated. That's something that at the university, any university, because you're a research institution, you need to really, and you have a lot of experience and you've been trained to use these cards, right? You know how to calibrate them, and you run controls all the time. Before every single test, you run control, and you have these practices, right? Recommended by manufacturers also, and what we've seen for years of experience. But what you see as many laboratories are opening around the world, some laboratories are run by people who don't have experience, they don't have the formal training, they don't have the right equipment, they don't know necessarily how to calibrate, or they don't have the right calibrators. So at maximal exercise intensities, it should be the RER well above 1.0. That means that you're producing a lot of CO2, right? Because of you're burning a lot of carbohydrates. And also you're producing lactate, and you need to buffer it. There, that bicarbonate is high also, and that's what you have higher CO2. Then that means also that you're not burning fat. So at 1.0, you should not see fat burning because fat is not fast enough to produce ATP when we're talking about maximal exercise intensities, right? So I get all the time reports of maximal intensities with a RER of 0.97 or 95 and fat oxidations of 0.4 at maximal intensities, right? Even with professional cyclists, right? So obviously, and the people, sometimes I see that, they don't realize about that mistake, and that might mislead the recommendations to an athlete. So that's why it's important to I don't know, people listening to this podcast might be beneficial to maybe know or that for athletes, right, to ask, or when they go to a laboratory, to do some due diligence on how well the machine is calibrated. Are they using a metabolic card that doesn't have a CO2 sensor, which then you can't use for these purposes? You could use it for VO2, but not for substrateization. So yeah, it's important too that now that we have a lot of these devices out there to really filter them or be a little bit more knowledgeable about it.
Yeah. Well, you talked about one.
As we know about power meters or by computers or so, right? It's important to get to know these a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, you talked about one anchor point being the RER of 1.0, but what about on the opposite end at the lower level intensity? A lot of people talk about FATMAX, and there's some myths around FATMAX. Can you kind of, tell us more about what does FATMAX mean?
So FATMAX is that point, to make it general, so it's better to understand, is that the exercise intensity at the one you burn or oxidize the highest amount of fat, right? So as you do, like, and you create a metabolic map of all exercise intensities, you start low exercise intensity all the way to max intensity, and you're going to see that fat oxidation, fat burning, it increases, and it gets to a point where it peaks, right? And from then on, it decreases. This is in a maximal test, right? And you will see that carbohydrates, they increase all the time, right? And even they get like an inflection point, they increase even higher. But that FATMAX is the point that is where you have the highest fat oxidation. This is what I was mentioning earlier, that about 20 years ago, I was using this point to define a metabolic event, because it's definitely a metabolic event. The intensity where you burn the most fat, and past that intensity, you start decreasing fat oxidation sharply. And that's because you're starting to switch more from the slow twitch muscle fibers to the fast twitch muscle fibers. And because the exercise intensity is very high and ATP synthesis is much faster, and fat simply cannot provide ATP fast enough, you need to use more carbohydrates. That doesn't mean that at low exercise intensities, you don't burn carbohydrates, right? It's a misconception out there that at low exercise intensities, you burn only fat. And sometimes that misconception comes from people like me, that in order, when we explain things to athletes, we tend to make simpler. And I have done it myself. I recognize it. That, like, yeah, here you burn fat and here you burn carbohydrates, right? Then when you start looking at the data, you might say, no, I burn carbohydrates here. Yeah, you're right. You burn carbohydrates. And in fact, any activity that is higher than roughly about 50% of your VO2 max, which is pretty much zone 2 and above, right? You're going to be burning more carbohydrates than fat, right? And that's a misconception, and it's difficult to understand because, we haven't been educated on that. And we ourselves, physiologists, have been, we have some blame for, because we haven't been able to explain that correctly. Many times, just as I said, to simplify the concept, right? But we get to simplify it so much that we got it wrong then, and we're, just getting other people confused.
Right. So within an exercise graded stress test, which is effectively what we've been talking about, when a person is at FATMAX, that does not equate to majority fat as the fuel source, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So at FATMAX, you are still burning more carbohydrates than fat.
Yes, exactly. So at FATMAX, let's say, like an average person's FATMAX could be around 0.4, 0.5 grams per minute, right? Let's say 0.45, right? 0.45 grams per minute, that is the equivalent of 60 minutes, right? So you're burning 27 grams of fat, right, in 60 minutes. And that in calories, we're talking about 243 kilocalories, right? So 0.45 grams per minute. At that same intensity, you might be burning 2.5 grams, maybe about 3 grams of carbohydrates, right? So 3 grams of carbohydrates per minute times 60, we're talking about 180 grams total, times 4, which is how many calories, it gives us 720, right? So you're burning 250 versus 720. You're burning significantly more carbohydrates, both in grams as well as in kilocalories. And this is a concept that is difficult to understand, but it's definitely, it's physiology. It's there, right?
So Iñigo, what are your recommendations when it comes to fueling strategies? Are we trying to, consume all carbohydrates that have been burned, on our next ride? Should we just look at TrainingPeaks total carbohydrate kilocalories burned for my 3-hour ride and try and equal that in terms of the number of gels I consume?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And this is one of the key features of why I started working with these methodologies, right? So we have about 500 grams of glycogen stored in the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
if you're well fueled, and we're assuming in Fueling Insights that you were well fueled starting the workout.
Exactly. So let's say that you go at you do a race that is about 3 hours, and that race you burn at that intensity, in this case watts per kilogram, you do about 3.5 watts per kilogram. So that's going to be about 168, 170 grams per hour. And that would be a total of about 500 grams of carbohydrate that you have burned, right? Which will give you a total about 2,000 calories worth of fat, right? So you're going to be right. In that case, you're going to be even. You're going to deplete all your glycogen stores, right? But we don't want that, because in the moment that the body starts realizing that there's no glycogen, it starts slowing you down. It's in a way, imagine that you have a car, and it's a smart car that doesn't know though when the next gas station is going to be, but it's feeling that you're going way too fast. Your miles per gallon are very high, and it starts calculating, and it tells you, hey, your autonomy is only for 150 miles, and I don't know where the next gas station is. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to slow you down. You're not going to go over 50 miles an hour. That's kind of what the body does when it senses that there's not much glycogen. Because, among other things, and I didn't mention that, but out of those 500 grams, about 125 grams go to the brain. The brain daily needs about 125 grams to think, to work, right? So anyway, so we don't want to have like that balanced out zero after a ride. So this is why what I've been doing over these years, and we've been doing with Team UAE, and I've been doing with other athletes, is about a 50% of what you burn, you replenish. And 50%, that's where you're going to get, in many instances, depending on the exercise intensities, between 80 to 100 to 125 grams or 60, right? Mm-hmm. More than that, especially at very high exercise intensities, we'll be talking maybe about having to replenish 200 grams an hour. And I think, and I was kind of the first one, to push for very high carbohydrate intake. I'm not ready there yet to recommend 200 grams an hour. So what has worked really well for me and for my athletes is about 50% of what you burn. That being said, we need more research on this, and maybe new formulations, right? Maybe there's new research and new formulations, and in 5 years from now, we're talking that you can have 200 grams an hour. But at this point, I think that it's safe to say 50% of what you burn, you should replace it. And this is what the Fuel Insights can give you that number, because it's going to be a good number to know what's your efficiency throughout the race. But how many how much gasoline you burn through a race or through a training ride. So the races where you know that you are going to be burning 80 grams an hour. Other ones, you're of carbohydrates. Another ones, you're going to be seeing that you burn 100 grams an hour. Other ones, or some rides, 60 grams an hour. So you can develop patterns, and or you can look at your by computer and know the nutrition that you have to take for that specific ride or for that specific race.
Awesome. Okay, so independent of whether Fueling Insights is 100% accurate for that individual, you will still see different values for different types of rides. A 90-minute zone 1 ride will have a very different recommendation, and if you target 50%, than if you did, in my example, a 6-hour gravel race in Steamboat, Colorado. I'm going to have a much different recommendation. So you can see the trends between different workouts and between different races.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, and this is why it's important to be cautious about the nutritional recommendations. And this is why this feature can not only help athletes with their nutrition during, but it can also help nutritionists guiding their cyclists. More and more cyclists are working with nutritionists nowadays, right? And also, by the way, obviously after the ride, you know what you have burned, and whether yourself through apps that are now with nutrition or with a professional nutritionist, you can plan on what's your diet going to be after the ride and dinner or so, right? But you're right about intensity. People, when we talk about 60 grams an hour, or 80 grams an hour, or 100 grams an hour, it depends on the exercise intensities. And as you said very well, right? At some intensities, you can have two examples. One example is maybe a zone 1, and another one is it's a race situation, right? And it's 3 hours. The entire competition is let's say 3 hours. Where in one instance, you're burning about it's just 80 grams. 335 grams, for example, in zone 1 or zone 2, and in the race you can burn 550, for example, at the same same time but different intensities. Therefore, your nutrition has to be different, because it's on one hand you want to provide and about 50% you want to replace it, but you don't want to overfeed. And this is another mistake that people do, that they go for an hour and a half ride, and they take 2 gels and 1 bar and gummies or sports drinks. You don't need that for an hour and a half, especially if it's a recovery day,
right?
Because you're barely going to burn. You're not going to burn many carbohydrates, and you're going to replace them perfectly during the diet. But if you go for like a 5-hour, 4-hour ride at zone 2. Yeah, and that's what we're seeing. Like our cyclists and the team, when we started this concept in UAE, they would bunk during the ride at zone 2, because at zone 2 for this level.
Can you anchor us on zone 2 and just brief definition of that and how that's defined? I know that can be a really long 90-minute podcast in itself, but just anchor some folks that don't know.
Yeah, so it's just there are multiple zones, right? Zone 2. According at least to my view and how I started using this a long time ago, is where you're starting to oxidize a lot more carbohydrates. That's where usually your FATMAX happens, and that's a transitioning point from the slow twitch muscle fibers into the fast twitch muscle fibers.
Okay.
And that's a metabolic point. When you are switching from the slow twitch muscle fibers to recruit more fast twitch muscle fibers, which are more glycolytic, and therefore they cannot oxidize much fat, and therefore they don't have as much mitochondria. That is telling you that you're on the verge of, and that's how I see it. Many people, many different concepts, right? But I see this is the exercise intensity at the one you stimulate mitochondria at a very high level, compared to when you go zone 4 or zone 5, where you're not burning fat anymore, or barely any fat. But anyways, that's kind of what I've been using for a long time. And as you said, we can be talking about 90 minutes, but this is in a 45-second blur. I can say that. But at that intensity, especially if you're a well-trained athlete, at that zone 4, at that zone 2, you can be burning about 200 grams an hour oxidizing. That's a lot. That's about 1,000 calories, of carbohydrates. Sorry, that would be about that's about 800 calories an hour, right? And that's what I was saying. That what I observed is that if you are oxidizing about 200 grams an hour at zone 2, and let's say you do 4.5 hours or so, you're going to be burning close to 900, 1,000 grams of carbohydrates. And so for that, you need to replenish, and that's what we try to do, about 100 grams an hour, even for those days. And if you don't do that, people are going to be bunking, right? So, and that's right away they tell you, man, I need to eat a lot, to complete this zone 2, because otherwise I bunk, which also shows that zone 2 is not a ride in the park, right? It can be really demanding, especially if you have a very high level of competition, like Pogacar said it. We haven't been disclosing numbers, but Pogacar said it publicly that his zone 2 when he rides, for 4 or 5 hours is about 300 watts, right? Yep. In order to move 300 watts, the amount of carbohydrates that you need is brutal, right? Brutal. Most people cannot even turn the pedals for more than a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, right? At 300 watts. Your average category 3 or 4 maybe can do that for 20 minutes. And they maxed out completely, right? They don't burn any fat. They burn a lot of carbohydrates, but someone extremely well efficient as a world-class cyclist, they can still burn in fat. In fact, it can be, usually it coincides with their FATMAX, but they burn tremendous amount of carbohydrates as well.
Yeah, and again, this is to the individual, and fueling strategies scale with athlete development. So if you're zone 2 and you're at 210 watts, or you're at 150 watts, that's a whole lot less than Pogacar. So the headlines state 120 grams an hour. That's the clickbait. And you're certainly not saying everybody needs to eat 120 grams an hour. It literally is down to the individual. And so this feature can help you decide what is that amount for you, given that upcoming race or workout. Now, practically speaking, within TrainingPeaks is what I'd like to discuss now. Right now, we just released the feature. We're going to have more iterations. It's going to get better. But right now, we're giving you the total kilocalories of carbohydrates burned for that workout, as well as for planned future workouts. So, but this feature has to be turned on. It's not automatically seen within TrainingPeaks. You need to go into your settings, nutrition, activate it, and add it to your workout metrics to view. Then it'll start to get calculated whenever we see a bike workout with power. But right now, in the first iteration, we're showing you the total kilocalories for the entire workout for carbohydrate and fat. So right now, you need to do a little bit of math. So given you prescribe or recommend targeting refueling 50% of what was oxidized, you would need to take those kilocalories. And so the quick math here is taking the calories, divide it by half, because that's the recommendation. Divide the carbohydrate kilocalories again by 4, because you get 4 kilocalories per gram of carbohydrate. And then if it was a 3-hour ride, you would divide that value by 3 to get the total grams of carbohydrate recommended for that ride or race. So there's a couple steps there, unfortunately, right now, but this is the first iteration, and we'll be working on adding total grams burned and grams per hour. That's the correct math, right? In terms of your recommendation.
Yes, no, absolutely. At this point, with that the way it's set up, you do need to do a little bit of math, but hopefully, you guys will have that out grams soon. But it's important that what I have observed over the last 20 years using this feature with different levels, and in our study, is that you need to break it down into different categories. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the same. Someone that's a world-class athlete is going to have a completely different metabolism and a completely different fat oxidation and mitochondrial function and lactic clearance capacity than someone who's a morally active individual. So, the metabolism varies largely among individuals, but mainly among individuals from one category. Within one same category, there's not so much variation. Right. And even at the Tour de France, like obviously we see someone like Pogacar or someone like at the end of the Tour de France, right, at the last one. But the percentage, right, of time between the first and the last one is very small, right? And we're talking about they are world class, the best in the world, right? Their metabolisms overall are quite similar. Same thing as a category 1 and category 2, or someone who is a master's degree, or someone who's recreational. So we need 3 inputs for this feature. One is like what's your gender. Another one is what's your weight, and what's your category. Okay? And with that, it's going to place your energy expenditure in terms of substrate utilization based on the work of 20 years and all the research done.
So, okay, easy. Gender, body weight, you can enter those in TrainingPeaks. Now, the third piece we need is the category. So can you tell us what those 4 categories are within TrainingPeaks? Obviously, world-class. You pretty much know if you're world-class or not. You're talking world tour, professional, or World Cup mountain biker, I assume, right? So the next category down would be elite versus, what's elite versus competitive?
Yeah. So an elite athlete is someone who could be like that category 1, category 2, that's kind of in the US, in Europe, that's equivalent of like a top amateur, right? Those ones who are trying to make it to the next level, which is the professional one, right? The top level in the world of professional cycling in this case, right? So that would be the elite level. And then you have the competitive level. And the competitive level are those ones who are not either seeking to become a pro or don't have the level, or are masters athletes, right? Who are very competitive, right? They train, with a very good structure, they eat with structure, and they have a very good level of fitness-wise. But they are not at the elite level yet. And I mean, you can see in your license too. What does your license say, right? It's going to tell you pretty much which category you are. And then you have the recreational, right? And that recreational is to someone like me, for example, where I don't compete. I'm not competitive at all, and I'm not trying to be there at all. I just ride for fitness, for longevity, and to improve my metabolic health. And that's the last category that we have, which is the recreational cyclist.
Yeah, I place myself as in competitive. I definitely know I'm not Cat 1. I know I'm not enthusiast. I can get on the podium in the Masters races. So that's where I place myself. So it's lining up pretty well right now with all the data I've seen. We have feedback. Should we go into questions now? We have feedback from users that have been using the feature. And so, one of them is, what about when you do a fasted ride? How might that change the data, or how might I, account for that if maybe my coach is prescribing a fasted ride and there's a reason for that? How might I interpret that when I get the results from TrainingPeaks?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that gets tricky. And that's when, you're more outside the regular of the regular exercise prescription. What happens when you ride in a fasted state? your carbohydrate oxidation rates are going to be lower because of kind of what I mentioned earlier about the analogy of the car, right? You haven't eaten breakfast or lunch or and so the body knows that, and you go out there and you start burning carbohydrates. So and this is well researched, right? When you have you are in the fasted state, you burn less carbohydrates and you burn more protein. This is what we don't recommend that much because you can get into like a dangerous terrain where you can elicit more a catabolic state because it's been shown in research where when you have a low glycogen content or where your glycogen content decreases and you don't replenish it, you start breaking down muscle protein for energy purposes. So you have the branched chain amino acids. They can get turned into glucose, and that's what called gluconeogenesis. And then you also have glutamine. Glutamine is an excellent source of energy that goes directly into mitochondria. And so you increase glutamine utilization, but that comes from the muscle. So we tend not to do that to avoid overtraining, fatigue, and catabolic states. But if you choose to do that for whatever the reason, yes, it's important to keep in mind that the feature of fuel insights might be off. Right. How much off, I could not be able to tell you that now, but okay. It's going to be off because it's not physiological.
Yep. The next question is related to gross efficiency. And if you go in and you can game the system and you can say, I weigh 200 pounds or I weigh 165 pounds, you will get different results within TrainingPeaks, Fueling Insights. So how does that relate to gross efficiency, which I believe is just assuming the same efficiency factor throughout for no matter who you are?
Yes. So I mean, gross efficiency it's an old term, that was used to calculate the percentage, of metabolic efficiency, right? So we're talking about in the nominator, right, of that equation, you have the power output, the work rate, in this case is in watts. And in the denominator, right, you have the energy expenditure in kilojoules, or you can have other units. But that formula itself, talking about efficiency, doesn't take into account that metabolic efficiency, right? And that metabolic efficiency leading to that gross efficiency, you need to take into account your mitochondrial function, your metabolic flexibility, your muscle fiber recruitment patterns, and your ATP synthesis, that the capacity to produce ATP from different fuels, either fat or carbohydrates. So it ignores the formula, the biological complexity, right, underlying metabolism. It's very simple to say, energy expenditure, kilojoules or joules or whatever, right? Yeah, but how do you get to that energy expenditure, right? We were talking about it, right? You can burn 1,000 calories, and 200 of those calories can be from fat and 700 from carbohydrates. Or if you're very efficient, you can burn 400 of those or 500 of those from fat and 500 from carbohydrates, right? So the energy expenditure is the same, but the efficiency is completely different, right? Although for gross efficiency, it's still there. So I think that even the definition of efficiency, it defeats the purpose because energy expenditure is considered the same. And then another assumption is that there's a fixed number, right, of gross efficiency that many people use, that is 21%. So there's a lot of many different assumptions in this formula that I would not recommend to understand how your metabolism works, and therefore the fuel utilization, and therefore the fuel insights.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about reviewing, but coaches, a lot of their job is around planning. And we have incorporated that into fueling insights. So coaches, when you use the structured workout builder and you are building out a future workout, if you are doing that within your workout menu system, it won't put in fat calories predicted because we don't know which athlete you're adding it to, which calendar it's going to. But once you take that from your workout calendar and you drag it on to Wednesday for John Smith athlete, it will then put in the predicted carbohydrate and fat utilization, leveraging fueling insights. So be sure to leverage that with your athletes. But related to that, Iñigo, are you then putting into the pre-workout notes, like the fueling strategy, to do a little more of the thinking for the athlete? Because oftentimes they won't even see those calculations. Are you putting in a fueling strategy for the workout and or race within the calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that for me it's very important, and also with the Team UE, with our nutritionist, he does it all the time. So you develop patterns, right? And you know what's your carbohydrate oxidations at different training rates, right? So you're not going to, and we've been talking about it briefly, you're not going to be burned the same thing at zone 1 or a recovery day or a zone 2 day or a high intensity day or a day that mixes a little bit of everything. So you could really dial in the quality of training by improving carbohydrates. As I was saying earlier, with zone 2, for example, at the high level, athletes, if they don't eat enough, they bunk, right?
Yeah.
And even if you don't get to bunk and you don't notice it, the quality of that day is not going to be nearly as good as if you know how to predict your fuel needs for that day. So as coaches or nutritionists, it's a great idea, a great tool for that, because we know that this day is going to be this intensity, so you need to have 60 grams an hour. Another day is a different intensity, you need to have 80 grams an hour. Another day's intensity, you need to have 100 grams an hour, or have like a 1,000 calories an hour, or 800 calories an hour, or whatever the calories an hour are, depending on the end exercise intensity. So it's very good to plan ahead. Also for the athlete, it's very good to predict because in case you don't have a coach, right, or a nutritionist, you know that this day, boy, I burn, 200 grams an hour of carbohydrates, right, 800 calories an hour. I need to really be prepared for those days, and then otherwise it's going to jeopardize not just your performance for that day, but your recovery for the next day, right? And then you can individualize this nutrition accordingly for its training, right? And also, both for nutritionist coaches or athletes themselves, is for the afterwards, right? You can plan ahead what's your dinner going to be like, right? And so that you can dial in things better. This is, if you do it correctly, it can be an advantage to your training program.
Yeah. Are you guys also then asking the athletes after a training session to put in what they actually consume, so you can see if there's any delta at all between recommendations and what was actually being consumed?
Always. And you get to a point that at first I was the first one, like, man, they're not going to remember what they eat, like they're in the middle of the competition.
I know, it's hard to do.
But it's amazing, as soon as they cross the finish line, they say, like, I had 5 gels, I have 6 or 7 sports drinks, and I have 2 bars, and I had like a half a panini. Bam. So you just enter that, and we have an app, and you enter that, and you can see exactly what they've done. But nowadays, you can do it yourself, just looking at the sticker and the nutritional facts. Like, oh boy, there you go. I had only 60 grams an hour. That's what I bunked in the race today. All right, and it's a learning process, you start getting used to that, and it's amazing how good you can get at memorizing what you had. First, for learning purposes, like to see this, like, oh boy, I burned today 80 grams per hour, and I consumed I burned today 200 grams an hour and I only consumed 60. That's what I bumped. I didn't do it. I did 30%, right? I need to bump it up. Or say, hey, I'm on the right track. I'm doing things right, because you know the gels that you're having and the sports drinks, and like, okay, I'm on track to do 80 grams an hour, right? And it's not that, obviously, it's like, oh, it's top of the hour, I need to do 80 grams. No, that's not going to work, right? You need to have it throughout the hour. And for that, you need to think, like, okay, now today's a 60 grams per hour day, or in the competition is going to be 100 grams per hour race. And I think it's a really cool process, right? Because you learn a lot as an athlete about how your body works and how to improve it. And you have meaningful information that you can deploy, into like a, meaningful nutrition.
Yeah, and it's not just whether you bonk or not. I mean, you mentioned earlier catabolic state and muscle damage. You don't always feel the muscle damage that is occurring if you are underfueling. So tomorrow's workout quality oftentimes relies on today's fueling strategy. If you underfuel today, hence muscle damage, you don't replenish that well enough. First of all, you had the muscle damage in the first place. That takes a while to repair. And then tomorrow's quality workout goes down. It's a spiral downhill from there.
Yeah. And one thing that it is nutrition. It's such an important piece for performance. It's absolutely crucial. If you don't have your nutrition well dialed in, you're not going to be able to recover day by day, week by week, microcycle by microcycle, and even the competition, the same thing. So it's very, very important. The nutrition has been transformation in cycling. It would be unthinkable nowadays to through the France to have only 40 grams an hour. Back in the days was the guideline, right? Now it's impossible. And if you do have 40 grams an hour, you're going to bunk, you're going to suffer. Now having 100, 125 grams an hour is allowing cyclists to not only get into the last part of the race with a lot more energy than before, right? And but also to be less catabolic for the next day. An example, in the Tour de France, when the guidelines were 30 to 55 grams an hour, it was super normal for a cyclist to lose 2 or 3 kilos, about 4 to 6 pounds, right, during the Tour de France. Now, at least with Team UAE, cyclists don't lose any kilo. They start the tour and finish the tour with the exact same weight because we dial in nutrition very well. And this is why it's as you said, it's just for that, that catabolic state that's very important to prevent it through nutrition. And it's just not for today, but it's for tomorrow and the next day and the next week.
Awesome. Well, Iñigo, it's been great. Thanks so much. As stated before, this is the first iteration of Fueling Insights within TrainingPeaks. We're working on improvements. We need feedback. And so send us your feedback and dig in there. Activate it first. It's not automatically on. Go into your settings, look for nutrition, and to add the Fueling Insights to your workout. I guess track, analyze, and plan, right? It's all things. It's not just reviewing, but it's also planning for the future of, how to fuel up and train the gut. So thank you so much for Iñigo, and it's been great getting your feedback, and look forward to improvements in Fueling Insights.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Endurance Unlimited. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on your platform of choice to never miss new episodes. Also, be sure to leave a 5-star rating to let your coach and the algorithm know you're ready to dial in your training. Find more resources to help you take on your next challenge at TrainingPeaks.com, or find us on social media at TrainingPeaks. Got questions? Leave a comment or send an email to podcast@TrainingPeaks.com.